What's going on, guys? Zuko back with another Dragonflight video. We're on the PTR again, and we're looking at Warrior again today. I finally got my Warrior leveled up, for crying out loud. In past, like, PTR iterations, like in Shadowlands and stuff, you could just, like, instantly level up a character to 60, I guess, at the time, and it was like, I don't know why they haven't done that in Dragonflight, but nevertheless, I have leveled up my Warrior, got it to 70, and then I jumped on the PTR right away, and I took a look at Arms Warrior, because they had some recent changes to their tier set bonus, which is super cool. Give it a more of a Mortal Strike kind of focus. We're going to look at the tier set bonus. I'm going to show you some gameplay stuff on the dummies, and we're going to just talk a little bit about what I think this tier set's going to do. And I really want to hear from you guys. I'm not an Arms Warrior main by any means. I have an idea of how it works, of course, but I really want to hear from you guys in terms of the talent build and what you think might be relevant with this tier set bonus going forward. So please let me know in those comments down below. Okay, here we go. Deep Wounds, 2-set bonus. Deep Wounds increases your chance to critically strike and your critical strike damage by 5%. So you basically always have Deep Wounds on your enemies. So you're basically always getting 5% crit damage. Deep Wounds critical strikes have a chance to increase the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 10% and cause it to deal 5,500 physical damage to enemies in front of you, stacking up to 3 times. So, first of all, my item level is 428. This number scales with your item level, from what I could see, just equipping gear. So it looks like it'll go up, I think, based on your item level. Number 2 is that this buff will stack, which means your next Mortal Strike will consume all stacks that you have. So if you have all 3 stacks, then your next Mortal Strike will deal 30% more damage, because it's 10% times 3, and then the 5,500 will go to like 15,000. So it's just, you know, whenever you get the buff, your next Mortal Strike will consume however many stacks of that buff you have. So kind of a good thing. So it means that, like, if you're Blade Storming, for example, and you build up 3 stacks of this buff, your next Mortal Strike will get to consume all 3 of them. So it's a nice little quality of life thing that's built in right there. Really, really good there, I think, for them to think about that. So let me talk about what the talents, how I think it changes the talents. Let me just show you really quickly. So I'm going to Blade Storm here. There we go. Watch the buff. It'll start to build up here if I get a... There's one there. Crushing Advance. Boom. I have 2 of them. From one Blade Storm, I got 2 Crushing Advances. I'm going to press Mortal Strike. I had 3 right there, and it consumed all 3. Then I got another Crushing Advance. So I hope that gives you a really quick idea. Look at it. It's at 2 stacks again. Look at how quickly it builds up an AoE. It's back to 3 stacks again. Your next Mortal Strike deals 30% more damage, and then it's going to deal 1,500 damage to enemies in front of me. You can see just on that little dummy, little pack that I was doing, Crushing Advance did 8.7% of our damage. Actually, crazy how much damage this thing does. I'll show you another. Here's a real test. Over the course of a full-blown test, it did 8.3% of my damage. Just the extra AoE portion of the 4-piece. That little, like, frontal cone that you're sending out with your Mortal Strike. That's what it does. So that's a lot of damage for a tier set bonus to be giving. Now, of course, that's AoE. This is AoE. It's going to do more damage in AoE. And you're going to proc. You're going to have a higher chance to get Crushing Advance in AoE because this procs off of your Deep Wounds critical strike. So if you have less targets for Deep Wounds to be ticking on, then you're going to have less procs. But I even found in single target, it wasn't that bad. It actually was pretty good. So let me just try to, let's go, my buff Uptime, I'll put it here. Let me just show you single target. Let's look, we're at the current, here we go. Okay. So I've got my Deep Wounds on the enemy right now. There we go. And you can see it hasn't procced yet, but hopefully it will. There we go. Oh, no, it didn't proc there. So in single target, much less procking going on here, obviously. My Deep Wounds has been on the enemy the entire time, and I haven't seen this thing proc yet. I don't think it's procced once, has it? I don't think so. There we go. We got one right there, finally. So we used it. Look at the damage of the current fight. Hold on a second. Current fight. Bring that over here just so we can see it. You can see much less damage, 0.8%. It's barely done any damage, right? 1% of my damage there. So On single target, I think this is definitely weaker than on AoE because, again, you only have one deep wounds target that you're going to be benefiting from. So that's a really big deal. So something just to keep in mind there. Certainly better in AoE, much worse in single target, I would say, in terms of the proc chance. Now, what is this going to do potentially to our talents? I was wondering about this because this procs off of your deep wound critical strikes. And then even then, your critical strikes only have a chance to give this crushing advance buff. So again, we need to look at, like, what are our sources of crit in the build. You can see on the spec side of things, of course, we have Cruel Strikes giving us 2%. Your Battle Stance gives you 3%, so that's 5% more crit right there. You can get more crit damage with Spirit Bastion, which might be relevant with the AoE build. I'll show you that in a minute. So far we have 5% crit from the class tree. You get another 5% increased critical strike chance on deep wounds, which is all we care about because that's what gives us the proc. So essentially, we have 10% more crit on deep wounds and another 2% here. I only have 1 point in it, so only 1%. So 11% more crit that we're getting towards deep wounds in particular, which is a really big deal. That means they're going to be critting a lot more. My crit right now is 24%. My haste is really low, which is very bad, I know. This is just the gear that I'm kind of working with on the PTR. But so my deep wounds essentially has a 35% crit chance right now just with the gear that I'm kind of wearing. So that's probably not too bad. And again, I think you're going to want to maybe spec into more crit than maybe you used to. I don't know exactly what Arms Warriors did in the past. I know that haste is very important, of course, but I think crit is going to rise in value here because the tier set bonus is so critical. It's so pivotal, that you crit that with your deep wounds in order to get this tier set rolling. So very, very important. Of course, it's also giving you 5% more chance. So I forgot to include that. So 40% chance because I'm getting 5% more crit chance from the tier set bonus. So my deep wounds has a 40% chance to crit. So that's pretty good. And then again, though, you're working with a chance to crit and then another chance on top of that to get the Mortal Strike buff. So very good in AoE as we saw, not so good in single target. I think you might want to spec into as much crit as you can get to with your talent tree, and then the rest of it you can just take care of with gear. The other part of this is that this procs off of Mortal Strike, right? This makes our Mortal Strikes better. If we get this thing procking, we want to be Mortal Striking as much as possible in order to take advantage of it. Now, again, it stacks up to 3 times, so you don't have to be Mortal Striking every single time it's off cooldown, but I do think in AoE, this thing procs so much that I think it's valuable to be trying to Mortal Strike as much as possible. And you might want to look at taking Unhinged. I don't know if anybody takes this right now, but while you're Blade Storming, you automatically will cast 2 Mortal Strikes. This will consume the buff if you have it. So if you get this Deep Wounds tier set bonus buff and then you just press Blade Storm, you'll Blade Storm and then you'll Mortal Strike for free, and it will consume the buff that you have acquired without having to actually use Mortal Strike, the actual ability. That's kind of cool. So it does work with kind of all the functionality. And then, of course, your Blade Storm sending out Mortal Strikes, it'll also do that when you have Blade Master's Torment. Activating Avatar will proc Blade Storm for you. That Blade Storm will proc 2 Mortal Strikes, and those Mortal Strikes can proc your tier set bonus. So you can kind of get them all flowing together, which is kind of cool. Let me show you, let's look at it. Let's do an actual fight here. And I'm going to keep the buff. The buffs are going to be ready here, and my damage is going to be here. I'm going to show you my overall damage, and then we'll talk about it afterwards, okay? So I don't know exactly how to start this, but I'm going to run in with Warbreaker, and then I'm going to Spear a Bastion first to get the critical strike damage, 25% more critical strike damage, and then we're going to Blade Storm, okay? So dash, we go Warbreaker, Elysian, here we go, and then, not Elysian, but Spear a Bastion into my Blade Storm. Out of Blade Storm, we're going to do Sweeping Strikes into Mortal Strikes. Try and do as many as we can. There we go. Okay. And then I'll do a Roar. And then I'm going to Cleave just to get my Deep Wounds. I want my Deep Wounds to stay. So I had Cleave here just to keep my Deep Wounds up on all enemies in front of me. That's why I'm taking Cleave. So you can see we're at about 167, 160k here. We're back into Warbreaker once again. My Sweeping Strikes isn't up, but I'm trying to press Mortal Strike on cooldown because it has a chance, you know, if I have the buff rolling, it's going to be doing that splash damage to everybody, which is what I really want. Okay? That's pretty big. My Thunderclap is just to keep rend going. That's all I care about. So my two like maintenance buffs are basically cleaving and pressing Thunderclap. Thunderclap gives me rend. My cleave gives me my mortal, the deep wound. Sorry, which is what I want. That's going to trigger my tier set bonus. So we want to keep that up as much as possible. I forgot to Warbreaker before pressing Bladestorm. I'm very sorry to all of you Arms Warrior mains. I apologize in advance. But you can see the rotation's pretty simple. We're settling at about 135, maybe 140k if I was playing this a little bit better. Lots of Mortal Strikes there. Boom, boom. I just did 3 in a row. There we go. That's about it right there. I had Sweeping Strikes up, so I wanted to keep doing as many as I could. But you can see, look at how quickly Crushing Advance builds up when you're in AoE. It's so fast. So I do think that in single target, this is not as good, but in AoE, it builds up so quickly. Crushing Advance, 56% uptime on the AoE pack. That's huge. That's amazing. That means you're going to want to be Mortal Striking a lot to make sure you're consuming it. And guess what? It did 10% of our damage. 10% of our damage. Just the, like, extra cone, you know, cleave that I'm getting when I press Mortal Strike while I have this buff up. So, on paper, it kind of looks like this wouldn't be up all the time because it's like your Deep Wound's critical strikes have a chance to give you this buff. That's a lot of qualifiers, but at the end of the day, because we have so many Deep Wounds on so many different, it just scales with the number of enemies that you have, and you end up getting this buff up a lot, which is really, really good. Really awesome to see that, and the damage out of it is amazing. I think the single target damage is going to be a little bit lower, unfortunately, because this is not going to be proccing as much because, again, it scales with the number of targets. And again, I don't know if my build is correct. I just took a lot of different buttons. But you can see Spirit Bastion did 5%. Thunderous Roar still did 6% of our damage. Cleave doing 6.3%. And again, Cleave I just took as like a maintenance button to keep Deep Wounds up. Because again, we want Deep Wounds to be proccing as much as possible for this tier set bonus. So, what do I think about it? I think it's actually, like, good. Just numbers-wise, it's great in AoE. It seems to just do a lot of damage. Like, I don't know if it's going to be necessarily fun to play. I think it seems fun to me. You're just getting more crit, and your crits are doing more work for you, and they're giving you this Mortal Strike bonus. What I want to hear from you guys about is, do you think you need to focus more on Mortal Strike in this build? Do you need to take things like Unhinged? Is it that important to be pressing Mortal Strike much, much more often to be trying to get this Crushing Advance damage because it's proccing so much? You know, 56% uptime is pretty huge. Do you think that's going to change the way that you build out your talent tree? Do you think you want to take Cleave so that you can maintain your Deep Wounds? Or are you going to be able to just keep it up with Warbreaker enough, and maybe your Mortal Strikes with Sweeping Strikes is going to be enough to keep it up? I mean, I tried it earlier without Cleave, and it felt like my Deep Wounds was dropping off of multiple different targets. So I would love to hear from you guys. Do you think Cleave is important in this build? Do you think that you want to take Unhinged to get those extra Mortal Strikes? Please let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Thank you so much again for watching, guys. I would love to hear from you once again. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next one.